Thanks everyone for attending. My name's Jason Lawson. I'm a software developer at Liberty IT, and this talk's going to be about using Analogies, a common language for diverse teams. So I thought I'd start off by just breaking down that wordy title. So apologies, the first slide's actually the wordy one. So what do I mean by diverse teams? By diverse teams, I mean product teams consisting of people with different experiences, backgrounds, cultures, roles, perspectives, interests, focuses, insights. We tend to find this a lot now, Agile, cross-functional teams, working with lots of different people all at the same time. Why do we need a common language? It's kind of, I guess, self-evident that there's clear advantages for success if people communicating understand each other as well as possible, but it can also present a lot of challenges when you have that diversity. And I want to talk about how I think analogy is a really powerful communication tool and technique to help with a common language across those diverse teams. So apologies again for a little bit wordy, but with all that communication and collaboration we have now in the industry, which is really, really positive, it does mean there's plenty of scope for misinterpretation and misunderstanding. That can stress relationships, slow down, speed to market, maybe you're not building exactly the right thing. So I think that's where analogies can be really helpful in terms of explaining and clarifying the value of something to all these different people you're talking to at the same time. And to support that, I'm going to tell a story about my favorite analogy and one I've used a lot over the last few years. And that is refactoring, or it that must not be named, as I tend to think of it. It's a subject that can cause a lot of fraught understanding and fraught conversations across the IT industry. So before I talk about that, from the man who literally wrote the book on refactoring, what is refactoring? So it's the specific way to change the code by a series of tiny behavior-preserving transformations. And it's that behavior, non-behavior changing that's the power of refactoring, but also the source, I think, of a lot of discord when people talk about refactoring in teams. And to illustrate that, I've got a conversation which I've unfortunately had more than once. So if we take this as the developer on the left, we're thinking it's good to get some time in this sprint to refactor the code base a little bit. The business are asking, well, what features and functionality does that refactoring deliver? Well, it doesn't deliver any actually, but it makes your code base more supple and easier to work with. Cool. Do we need to test this after you've done this? Yeah, we're going to need some manual testing to make sure we haven't broken it. That'll be great. So from the business trying to seek some clarification, if I understand this right, you want to time and investment to change the code, but it won't deliver any real value for us, and you're going to need us to help you test it. Yes, but it keeps our code clean and reduces tech debt, which is very important to development teams. Business, I'm not really sure what those things are. Could you not just have written this that way in the first place? That would have been awesome. Well, as the code evolves, it tends to get more complex, gets a little bit messier, so we need to tidy it up every so often. And that maybe helps a little bit. That's not a bad description. But the business is still thinking, well, maybe we can do that later. We've got something else in our backlog that's really going to help with our NPS. So can we pull that in and do this refactoring thing some other time? Yeah, okay, we'll do that then. So at the end of this conversation, fairly typical conversation, the developer feels disheartened, demotivated, and the business are probably a bit vexed as to what has been discussed, and maybe even suspicious. Are these guys looking for a bit of a free ride investment and they're not even delivering anything? And I've had this conversation, very similar to this, unfortunately. And when I had this conversation, we tried to then go back to the business and try and sell it a bit better. So we did things like this. We showed them the consequences of not refactoring. This is a really good diagram that at some point your throughput will start to degrade and trend down, whereas if you refactor, it stays high. So there's a cost associated to this. Fundamentally, we hadn't explained what refactoring was, so explaining the consequences actually wasn't very relevant. This really didn't help. We thought it would, it didn't. We fundamentally couldn't and hadn't successfully explained refactoring, why it's necessary and the value that it brings. That's when I thought, well, we need something different. So we ended up coming up with the use of an analogy. And that analogy is, and Gordon Ramsay's going to help me out here, it's how refactoring is just like a restaurant kitchen. So if you think about going to a restaurant and ordering a meal, there's concepts there that really do map onto software delivery. Customer orders from menu, that's the requirements, goes off to this team in the background, the cooks stroke developers, and they work away and they deliver that meal, and there's a time associated with that, there's a cost associated with that, There's expectations in terms of the customer associated with it. And the goal is to deliver that meal. That's that single goal for that customer. But more than that, for a restaurant, the goal is to deliver meal after meal after meal at a sustainable, predictable cadence. That's the business model. You can keep doing that. So here's a couple of photos of the kitchen. The one on the left, the top left there, is actually one in Belfast. I was at recently. It's one of those ones where you can sit at the kitchen and watch everyone go about their business and make their meals. Really cool experience. But what strikes me about it is that when the guys are making the meals, they don't just make a meal, throw it out, and then move on. You can see that at the end of each deliverable, each meal being prepared, everything's back in its place that it was beforehand. They take a little bit of time, they clean up the counters, they put the containers where they are, they wash their hands, they clean the utensils. They make these small investments of time and effort constantly to enable a sustainable pace. And that's key to the business. That's key to a restaurant being able to successfully deliver meal after meal after meal to its customers. Refactoring your code base has the exact same goal, and it has the exact same consequences if you do not adhere to that process. So if we look at this nice clean kitchen where everyone can understand where things are and can deliver and work in it, let's flip it on its head. What would happen if you didn't do that? What if you didn't clean up? You end up with this. Now initially, you can ship all these meals really, really quickly. And there's one guy who's happy, the guy on the left. He's got his meal, fantastic. Everyone else is struggling. So you go faster initially because you're not worried about cleaning up, but eventually your counter space decreases. You have less clean utensils. You have less area to work in. Things are being put back in places where you aren't aware of where they are. So you start to trend down. And eventually the restaurant will not be able to deliver meals anymore, certainly not in a good time frame. It's going to get lots of customer feedback, all of it negative. This is not a sustainable business. But historically, this is what has happened in IT massively. Put out those deliverables, put out those stories, do it quick and dirty. Yeah, we know it's not got the right automated test. We know it's not been refactored. We will get to that later. That'll be in another sprint. That's fine. That never happens. And the tech debt builds up, and teams start to slow down, or they deliver at completely variable rates in their different cycles. That frustrates everyone. And then you come to the big refactor. If a kitchen had to do a big refactor, they'd have to shut down, clean everything up, and figure out where everything needs to go again. When that happens in software projects, stop, it takes time, costs money, everything's cleaned up, the code base is cleaned up. But of course there's going to be defects introduced as well. So again, that's a really frustrating process. And this was a really effective analogy for us at this point. This is where it really started to hit home, and we found a way to explain the value of refactoring. When you take the messy kitchen, and everyone understands could relate to how a restaurant kitchen worked. So there's a really good building of a shared understanding here. When we took the messy kitchen and compared it with the clean kitchen and explained that we want this clean kitchen, that's what we want our code base to be. We're heading towards this messy code base. We want to make sure we don't get there and end up in this situation. We want to be able to deliver for you guys predictably and constantly. Once we had that sort of conversation, then went back to the graph and the consequences, the time associated and the cost associated with not doing the refactoring, then it really started to make sense. It really hit home with the business. Yes, this is a good analogy. Do that constant small investment of time and effort. Keep your code base clean, and we'll be able to get constant delivery and have less frustration and less stressed relationships. So this really helped with shared understanding. It was really, really effective for us. So as much as I've talked about refactoring, this is really about analogies. Use analogies. They're really, really powerful. This particular analogy was really effective in my context. I'd encourage you all to think about what might work for your own interactions, because different interactions, contexts, different analogies will be more powerful than others. Shared understanding is critical to product and software development, so being deliberate and purposeful about your analogies, what the stories you can tell to help reach that shared understanding is really, really important. I experiment with them, try and make them fun. A bit of comedy actually does really help. If anyone's interested, I put up an article that expands more on this sort of analogy on Medium. And then just to throw another couple of out, if anyone wants to think about another couple of other ones, a couple of my other favorite ones are, instead of thinking about software engineering as civil engineering, think about it as gardening. Software engineers are gardeners. Software architecture is Tetris. All your less than perfect choices, leaving these gaps that build up and build up until the point where you then have to refactor the whole thing and start again. So thanks very much. Perfect.